Welcome to the Adapta webinar, Life After GDPR, Getting Control of Your Data. I am Paul Stewart, the Marketing Manager and Organiser of today's event. Before I hand you over to our speaker, Rob Gethin-Smith, there are a few webinar rules which we ask you to follow to ensure the smooth running of this session. You are encouraged to submit questions at any time throughout the duration of the presentation. Please type your questions using the chat box. All questions will be collated and presented to Rob to respond to at the end of the presentation. In the unlikely event that you experience any technical issues, please do let us know via the chat box and we will work to rectify these as soon as possible. We take your privacy very seriously. By registering you for this webinar, we will use your personal data to send you the presentation slides and request your feedback. You will not receive any marketing materials from us unless you have already opted in to do so. Your personal details are only visible to the organiser, but they are not visible to the other attendees or to the speaker. If you submit a question via chat, only the organiser will see who asked for the question, and you will remain anonymous to the other attendees and the speakers. We are recording this webinar, but again, you will remain completely anonymous to all attendees. Lastly, I would like to assure you that no puppies were harmed during the making of this webinar. Thank you. Over to you, Rob.
Okay, thank you, Paul. It's great to see so many people online. As Paul said, I'm Rob Gethin-Smith, and I'm just going to give you a very quick introduction to this webinar. This webinar is all about getting control of your data, and I guess this is incredibly important in this increasingly complex data-driven world that we live in. And it's also important in this post-GDPR world. I guess one of the things that the arrival of GDPR taught us is that we haven't necessarily been managing our data well enough. And now we've all achieved GDPR, or hopefully very close to achieving GDPR compliance. The important question really is, how do we operationalize GDPR while making sure our entire data environment meets the needs of our organizations? In terms of the objectives for this webinar, I'm going to introduce the concept of a data governance framework as a way to better manage your data. And I'm also going to suggest ways that Adapta can help. Agenda-wise, I'm going to say a brief bit about me and Adapta, give a bit more detail around the complex on this thing I'm calling the complex data landscape, and then dive into the data governance framework. We're going to look at a handful of case studies and then very briefly talk about how Adapta can help in a bit more detail. And then there will be time at the end, about 5 minutes at least at the end, for you to submit your questions via the chat facility on this webinar. And as Paul said, please do so throughout, and he will collate those as we go along. So very briefly, just a bit about me. I'm a partner at Adapta Consulting, and I'm a digital technology and business change expert. I've been a chief information officer for the last 20 years, working across the sector. I've worked for a number of national charities and arts organisations, and my previous experiences as an engineer, both in industry and the British Army. I'm also a trustee for the Society for the Protection of Animals Abroad, where I chair the fundraising and marketing committee. And just to prove I'm a real person talking to you on the end of this webinar, I recently ran the London Marathon. Actually, I'm not sure that does prove I'm a real human being. I ran the London Marathon for Spana, and this is a picture of my lovely family at the end. And as you can see, they were so impressed with my running style, they thought I looked like a donkey. Moving on to just say a bit about Adapta. We're a specialist team. We are change experts in process, people and technology. And we're specialists because we work exclusively with non-profit organizations. And over the years, we have worked with literally hundreds of different non-profit organizations. And one of our key specialities, I guess, and what sets us aside from most organizations is that we are 110% independent of both technical solutions and vendors. And all of our consultants have also held senior management positions in and leadership positions in organizations similar to the ones that we provide advice to. And together, we have a lot of experience. And on top of these lovely faces you can see here, we have a team of very experienced associates. And here's just an example of some of the organizations we have worked with, and in particular have assisted recently with GDPR and helping them become GDPR compliant. Okay, so on with the webinar. At Adapta, we totally recognize that your data is the lifeblood of your organization. Your staff may come and go, your processes and systems will constantly change, but all the while your data steadily accumulates, as do the potential risks and also opportunities in this complex data and information driven society that we live in. Quite rightly, GDPR has been the focus. GDPR compliance has been the focus over the recent time. However, the data landscape is complex. And in a rapidly changing digital world, there are many competing demands on our data and also many opportunities. There is also a risk, however, that your GDPR compliance becomes over time swamped and loses focus. And there's also a risk that the way that you've achieved GDPR may not be joined up with these other areas. And like I say, organizations could begin to lose focus on what they've achieved. The arrival of GDPR has also taught us that we haven't been managing our data well enough. We've been inconsistent. We haven't valued our information assets properly. And generally, most of us have misunderstood their potential. Looking ahead, the organizational frameworks also often do not exist to assure ongoing compliance with data protection. And digital technology, as I've already mentioned, will continually challenge our ability to manage personal data. The good news, I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear, is that by focusing on GDPR, has required us to have, maybe for the first time, a conversation about the importance of data at the highest level of our organizations. However, the opportunity, I guess, is how do you leverage this new understanding and interest in data and turn the conversation from one about compliance to one about insight and innovation? How do we recognize the value of your data versus its utility just for compliance? Our experience at Adapta is that most organizations are missing out on the opportunity to build a strategic approach to data governance. So just want to spend a brief moment really thinking about, well, what is this thing called data governance and where does it fit in? So at Adapta, we spend a lot of our time advising clients on strategies for various things, such as IT and information systems, things like networks and servers, cloud technology and office applications. We advise them on application strategies around CRM, HR, finance systems, for instance. And we also advise them on digital technologies, things like websites, apps, and interoperability with third-party web services. But as this wonderful diagram shows, data sits at the heart of this. In fact, none of this would matter if we didn't have a lot of data to have to contend with and manage and use and turn into information. Data is the common denominator. But why is data governance important? Well, it is hard to properly manage your data. We all know this. Our systems and data have evolved in a way that mean that they do not necessarily support your organizations in the way that they should. But quite often your data is where you need to start before looking at broader system change. And this is where data governance fits in. And just for a moment, I just want to explain my use of the word data. I'm really referring here to structured data, the stuff that sits in structured repositories like databases, rather than our broader information assets. However, having worked a lot as a CIO in organizations, I broadly think the principles we're going to go through can easily apply to our information and data environments. So let's dive into this thing that I'm referring to, the data governance framework. I guess at one level, it's really quite straightforward. It's a joined up framework for effectively managing your data, covering strategy, policies, procedures, architecture, and culture. And these dimensions, if you like, are very much mutually dependent on each other. And together, they each play an important part in the governance of your data environments. And one way of thinking about them, as this WYSI graphic has just shown you, is the why, what, how, where, and who of data. And we're going to look through each of these now in a bit more detail, starting at the top with data strategy. So the purpose of a data strategy, a data strategy explains why data is important to your organization and how it helps you achieve your mission. And there's various ways of looking at this, but one way is, as this diagram suggests, is to use a data maturity model. And there's lots out there, and here's just one very simple example. And while a simple tool, it can be a very powerful tool to help you as an organization decide on the role and potential of your data right across your organization. And it can really help begin to have that conversation across your organization and build awareness of why data is important. It can help you assess where you are now in your data journey and plan the next steps in your evolution. It can help you diagnose and prioritize your issues and opportunities. And as I said, it can help you build awareness of what it takes to be more data mature. Overall, it can help you decide on your vision for data, which would be enshrined in your data strategy, i.e., where do you need to be and why? Whether actually it's fine just resting at the data foundations level, or to move towards being far more data driven, where data is embedded in all your processes and supports all your decisions. And this tool can help you decide, well, what is right for you? The benefits of course, of a data strategy help you define your vision, including the role and scope of your data and your approach to achieving this. Data policies are the next level, and you've seen this diagram before. Remember, I was calling this our complex data environment. Well, if I click a button, it amazingly turns into something that looks slightly less daunting. And this is the role of policies. Policies are a key way for helping us make sense of our complex environments, our complex data environments. Data policies are the essential tool for explaining the principles that underpin how we manage and use our data. But they should go well beyond being a set of rules and being seen as the thing to obey to achieve compliance. They should be seen as tools to help you open the door and pave the way to achieving your strategic data capability. And of course, your policies need to be joined up, consistent, up to date and accessible, and of course, readable. They most importantly must be aligned to your strategy, the thing that we've just been talking about. Together, your policies can help you make sense of the complex demands on your data and maximize begin to help you see how you can maximize their opportunities. Moving on to the next dimension, data procedures. I guess maybe the most straightforward of the 5 dimensions in a way, because procedures are is like a manual. Procedures tell anyone handling or using your data how to do this to ensure both compliance but also best practice. And one way I always think about this is if a new starter walked through your door today, this is be the things you give them to say, this is how you get going in terms of managing the data environment in the right way. This is what to do and this is what not to do. And begins to give them a starting point to understand why this is important for the organization. So together, your procedures make up your user handbook and could cover anything from how to dispose of sensitive data to how to write and publish reports. They need to be complete and constantly updated. And in our experience, they are often forgotten. Accurate procedures also underpin compliance, e.g. through your training and support your ability to achieve best practice. Your procedures, of course, need to be accurate, accessible, and up to date. On to data architecture, which I think is at the opposite end of the spectrum from data procedures in many ways in terms of, let's say, meatiness of your data governance framework. Inevitably, our systems have evolved and the way we have recorded data is not necessarily consistent anymore or aligned to what the organization needs. It is inevitable. Your data architecture tells you actually where your data is, but more importantly, where it needs to be to support your objectives and achieve your data strategy. And of course, the role of an architect is to redesign your environments, and in this case, your data environments. And there are a range of tools architects use, and in this context, there are a range of tools you can use to help order and audit and map your data and help you redesign your optimal data environment, your desired data architecture. This also helps you begin to agree some standards across your data environment, things that you intend to establish for your data systems, like metadata and controlled vocabularies, that ensure your data is consistent for both reporting purposes, but critically for to support interoperability across systems within and beyond your organization. And it's data architecture that helps you begin to work this out. It really is an essential tenet of data governance to know what data you have, where it is, and where it needs to be to support operational processes and reporting. Moving on to the fifth dimension, then data culture is the glue that binds everything together. It, of course, is all about your people and what they see as important and what they see as not important. It helps you, by focusing on data culture, of course, it helps you establish the roles and behaviors required to deliver your data vision and strategy. It really is about actually, in reality, who owns data and what is going on the ground, because this is often very different from what your policies and procedures dictate or say should be happening. By focusing on data culture through stakeholder engagement and understanding what's happening on the grounds, you can develop your change management approach to deliver your data strategy and really begin to identify the barriers and the levers required to deliver this. So that's the 5 dimensions of the data governance framework. And so just to summarize, we have talked through this framework for effectively managing your data, covering strategy, the why, policies, the what, procedures, the how, your architecture, the where, and the culture, the who. And as I've said in the introduction, most organizations are really missing out on the opportunity to use a framework like this to build a strategic approach to data governance, which can help reinforce compliance with things such as data protection, while also beginning to move you towards being more data driven and valuing your data beyond its role as a utility just for compliance. There are, of course, numerous benefits of pursuing better data governance. By getting data governance right, you could achieve a range of benefits, increase efficiency and clarity on data ownership, for instance, more consistent, better and more consistent reporting across your organization. You can cement the work you have done on GDPR compliance into a solid framework and provide assurance around its sustainability going forwards. And you can, of course, begin to understand the potential of your data and maximize the value and begin to have that conversation across your organization and begin to put in the tools to do this. For me, though, the most importantly, it's really about clarifying accountability. That is implicit within the word governance, and putting in place a robust framework to ensure you can begin to monitor that you have better control on your data and move your organization towards being more data driven. And of course, Adapta can help by helping you grow awareness across your organization of why data governance is important and establish your business case for investing in your data environments. We're just going to spend a brief moment looking at some case studies, and there's 3 here, and these are organizations that we have helped with their data governance. And the first case study is a hospice, and what was really interesting, I guess, was the fact that this hospice had access to NHS systems. And when we first engaged with this hospice, Adapta were really asked to carry out an information system security audit in preparation for their self-assessments. But the context for this was much broader in terms of data governance, because actually our health check in working with them found that their technical security was really rather excellent and lots of good practices in place. But there were numerous broader data governance issues. And really key for them was the lack of clarity on their data assets and ownership of these. There was lots of local data being collected, processed, and dare I say, hoarded with poor access controls. And they also had a large network of volunteers who were accessing data and indeed using personal email for transferring that data. So with our help, by beginning to look at the broader aspects of data governance, we were able to help them put in place an information and data governance committee that was the starting point for them to begin to recognize the issues, to begin to take control of what was actually happening on the ground. And this really is a good example of, again, as we've indicated through our framework, the difference between what you want to happen through your policies and procedures and what actually is happening on the ground, and the two things not aligning. The next case study is work we've done with a disabilities charity. And this charity is going through a large change and restructure. And they brought us in to run a GDPR compliance program. But what we quickly found was that the issues were much broader in terms of at the people level and the cultural level, people just didn't have time. Whilst they did recognize the importance of data protection compliance, they really didn't have the time. And really, I think this is key, saw it as someone else's problem to solve. And on top of that, they really had a huge backlog of data that needed reviewing. And we helped them by providing policy templates, which really gave them a head start in beginning to put in place what they wanted to happen and why, and also began them to think about how do they build the business case for bringing in the additional resource required to free people up to tackle this huge backlog that they faced. And so together we helped establish the importance of data governance across their organization. The third case study is a drugs charity, and data governance there was already seen as a priority. However, the organization really didn't know where to start, and using our framework, we were able to help them scope out and really critically here prioritize what changes were required. And I think really refreshingly for them, our review identified some really basic controls that were missing and things that they could be doing. So for instance, we helped them implement a basic mobile device management solution, and also embark on a Cyber Essentials security accreditation, which was really what they needed as a priority in building their data governance framework. Okay, so that's some case studies. The next slide before we move into time for you to ask some questions is just very briefly, so don't go anywhere, please, very briefly, a word on the services Adapta can offer. And I really won't talk long on this, but obviously we can help you, and we offer 3 different levels of support where we can help build awareness through a half-day workshop. We can run fixed price projects depending on your needs, and of course, drawing on the full breadth and depth of Adapta experience, we can tailor an engagement to meet your needs. And we would be really happy, obviously, to meet with you and discuss your needs to do any of this. Okay, with about 5 minutes to go, I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to look across to my colleague Paul, and he's going to give me a thumbs up if we have any questions coming through. He's putting his thumbs up, so I'm just going to mute while he reads out the first question.
Yes, we do have a question. There are still a number of participants still online, so if you do have any questions, please submit them now. So, how do I get my organisation to care about data governance?
Okay, so how do I get my organisation to care about data governance? That is, I guess, a fantastic question, isn't it? To build the awareness at the senior level, because whilst you may totally recognise everything I've said, it may not be recognised where it really counts, and that's with your leadership team. And I guess I've probably got at least one thought on this, and I've mentioned it during the conversation. And one could be leveraging the conversation we have been having around data protection compliance and talk about the importance to really cement what we've all achieved there and make sure there is a framework that holds on to what we've achieved going forward and allows us to sort of maximize, consolidate the gains we've made and build on those. And to begin, and as I've already said, begin to turn that conversation beyond the role of data for compliance purposes into the opportunity that data has in terms of insight and value, extra value to your organization. So that would be my thought. And of course, yes, easier said than done, I'm sure. And I guess the starting point would be finding on the senior leadership team or someone very influential across the organization, an ally to begin to have that conversation with. Do we have any more questions, Paul?
We do have a comment. Someone said, delighted to hear that you mentioned sometimes there are simple solutions to support data governance. May I assume training and awareness is part of your culture framework as people are the heart of data management?
Thank you very much for that question. Yes, absolutely. So although I haven't been specific, the strand where the dimension around culture is really about change management. Is getting, as well as getting your policies and procedures lined up, it is about getting your people lined up. And there's obviously lots of different ways to do that, depending on the type of organization and the size of organization you're in. But through stakeholder engagement, you identify the right ways to do that. And one way for sure is through formal training, but that really is a journey rather than an event, as we all know. And training has to be backed up by broader cultural aspects of wanting to be more data driven, such as leadership, for instance, internal communications and consistency on all of those aspects into the future.
Okay, and you mentioned in a case study the wide variety of data held by staff around the organisation. How did you help formalise that data recording?
I'm looking slightly blank at the moment, I'm afraid. Thank you for that question. I'm just going to ask my colleague to repeat it, actually.
Okay, so you mentioned in the case study the wide variety of data held by staff around the organisation. How did you help formalise that data recording?
Okay, I'm back. I've got it. Sorry, I had to just think for a moment. So one of the within the data architecture strand, one of the tools. So I mentioned there's a range of tools to begin to assess and understand your data architecture, and one of them is building an information or data assets register. That really is, and as a chief information officer in organizations, I've done this several times, and it really is a powerful tool to begin to categorize the different data categories of data assets that you have and begin to have a conversation around ownership, where this data resides, and of course the issues and risks that relate to each of these data assets. And that would be a tool that I would propose using. And in the case study, that's indeed what we did with this organization to produce an information and data asset register.
Okay, and are you able to share the template policies that you shared?
Yes, no, absolutely. So we have some basic templates for data protection, and very happy to share those. So I suggest if you get in contact with us directly, we can understand more specifically about what you're looking for, just in case we don't get that right first time, and then we'll send those over to you. That's absolutely fine. Any more questions?
There are no more questions, so I would like to close this webinar now and thank you all for participating. Thank you very much.